This marriage is just business, said the Mafia Alpha, until he fell for his Omega husband. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story from our channel. It only takes a moment, it is completely free, and it is one of the best ways to support us as we continue bringing you more dramatic, emotional, and unforgettable stories like this one. Your support truly means the world to us. And before we begin, tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from, and what time it is where you are right now. We love discovering how far these stories travel, and seeing everyone joining us from different places around the world. Now, let's begin today's story. If you ever mistake my kindness for love, Julian, remember this marriage has only one purpose: business. Adrian Cross said the words without raising his voice, yet they seemed to silence the enormous room around them. Less than an hour earlier, hundreds of guests had watched one of the most powerful Mafia Alphas in the city exchange vows with Julian Hayes, the quiet Omega nobody in Adrian's world seemed to understand. Now they stood alone inside Adrian's private study at Cross Estate, 20 miles outside the city, with rain tapping against the tall windows and a thick marriage contract resting between them. Adrian removed his wedding ring, placed it beside the document, and studied Julian with the same unreadable expression he used during negotiations. At 32, Adrian had built a reputation on discipline. He trusted numbers, agreements, and carefully measured decisions. Love belonged to another category entirely, one he had spent years refusing to enter. You will have complete protection under my name, Adrian continued. Your family receives everything we agreed upon. In public, we behave like husbands. In private, you are free to live your own life. I expect nothing more. Julian looked at the contract, but made no move toward the pen. That surprised Adrian. Most people became nervous when he waited. Julian simply turned another page. He was 27, elegant, but unmistakably masculine, with a composed confidence that made him seem strangely out of place among people who had spent the entire wedding treating him like a decorative addition to the Cross family. Several of Adrian's associates had barely spoken to him. One had even joked that an Omega husband would make Adrian appear more respectable at charity dinners. Julian had heard every word and answered none of them. Now Adrian understood why. Julian had not been intimidated. He had been observing. Is something wrong? Adrian asked. Possibly. Julian turned back 3 pages. Adrian's eyes narrowed. With the marriage agreement? Not with the marriage. Julian placed one finger against a paragraph buried beneath several financial provisions. With this. Adrian glanced down. Clause 47 concerned voting authority over a small holding company controlled by Cross Strategic Group. It was so routine that Adrian could barely remember approving it. What about it? Who wrote this clause? Julian asked. Adrian's expression hardened slightly. Why? Julian finally looked directly into his eyes. Because whoever wrote it either made an extraordinarily expensive mistake, or they are hoping nobody notices what happens 6 months from now. For the first time that evening, Adrian stopped thinking about Julian as the Omega he had married for an alliance. He picked up the document and read the provision again. Then again. Nothing immediately appeared unusual. Explain. Julian calmly reached for the pen, but instead of signing his name, he circled 7 words near the bottom of the page. Adrian read them, and the silence in the room changed. Those 7 words created a pathway through 3 subsidiary companies, one that could eventually transfer voting control without triggering the protections Adrian had personally established. Almost nobody knew enough about the Cross organization to recognize it. Julian had discovered it in less than 20 minutes. Adrian slowly raised his eyes. How did you see this? Julian slid the contract back across the table. You told me this marriage was business, Adrian. A faint, confident smile touched his face. So I read the business. Adrian stared at his new husband, then reached for his phone. Somewhere inside the Cross organization, someone had hidden a door. And somehow, the Omega everyone had underestimated had found it on his wedding night. By 8 the next morning, Julian understood that Cross Estate had rules nobody had bothered to explain, because everyone assumed he would never matter enough to break them. Breakfast was served at exactly 7:30. Adrian entered the East study at 8. Senior members of the Cross organization arrived through a private entrance 10 minutes later, and nobody entered the study without permission. Julian learned all of this without asking a single question. He simply watched. From the second-floor landing, he noticed which employees relaxed when Adrian was absent and which became more careful. He noticed that Marcus Reed, Adrian's financial director, always carried 2 phones but only placed one on the conference table. He noticed that Daniel Mercer, Adrian's oldest advisor, greeted every senior member by name except Marcus. Most importantly, Julian noticed that information seemed to travel through the estate faster than Adrian could authorize it. At 9:15, Adrian found Julian in the library with 3 newspapers, a legal pad, and a cup of coffee that had gone cold. You caused an interesting morning, Adrian said. Julian looked up. Because of Clause 47? Because 6 attorneys are currently arguing over how none of them noticed it. Adrian remained standing. They believe it was an administrative error. Do you? Julian asked. I believe mistakes happen. So do coincidences. Adrian's expression tightened. Julian turned his legal pad around. He had written 6 dates in a neat column. These are public announcements involving Cross Strategic Group during the last 4 months. Each announcement was preceded by unusual market activity. Adrian glanced at the dates. Public information can travel quickly. Before it becomes public? That stopped him. Julian tapped the 3rd date. Your acquisition of Hartwell Logistics was announced on May 18th. Trading activity changed on May 16th. Your restructuring plan was announced June 9th. The same pattern appeared June 7th. Adrian pulled out the chair opposite him. It was the first time he had chosen to sit with Julian rather than speak down to him. What are you suggesting? Someone knows your decisions before the public does. That is a serious accusation. I did not accuse anyone. Julian leaned back calmly. I identified a pattern. Adrian studied him for several seconds. Why were you looking? Julian's answer came without hesitation. Because somebody hid a door inside our marriage contract. I wanted to know whether there were other doors. The word "our" landed strangely between them. Adrian looked back at the dates. If you are right, there should be another pattern. There is. Julian turned to a fresh page. You have a private meeting tomorrow regarding the Westbridge redevelopment project. Adrian's gaze sharpened. That meeting had never been announced. How do you know about Westbridge? I heard 2 men discussing parking arrangements downstairs. They never mentioned Westbridge, but they mentioned a conference location 3 miles from the development site and said Adrian wanted the Western proposal ready before noon. Julian lifted one shoulder. People reveal more than they realize when they assume the person listening is unimportant. Adrian said nothing. Do not cancel the meeting. Julian continued. Change one detail. Something harmless, but specific. Tell each person a slightly different version. Then wait. Adrian's eyes remained fixed on him. You want me to test my own people. I want you to test information, not loyalty. There is a difference. For the first time, something almost like approval appeared in Adrian's expression. He stood and walked toward the door, then stopped. Julian. Yes? Tomorrow morning, you are coming with me? Julian raised an eyebrow. I thought I was supposed to smile at charity dinners. Adrian looked back at his husband. So did I. The next morning, before Adrian's car had traveled even 5 miles from Cross Estate, his phone rang. He listened silently for 20 seconds, then ended the call. Julian watched the city pass outside the window. Which version? Leaked? Adrian asked quietly. Julian turned toward him. Adrian's face had become perfectly still. The one I gave only to Marcus, he said. Julian did not smile. He had hoped to be wrong. Instead, within 48 hours of entering Adrian Cross's world, the Omega husband everyone had dismissed had just identified the first thread leading towards someone inside the Empire. The Westbridge meeting was held on the 38th floor of a glass tower overlooking downtown, inside a conference room designed to make visitors feel small. Adrian sat at the head of the table while Julian took the chair beside him. The reaction was immediate. Several Alpha executives exchanged glances. One finally smiled at Julian with polished condescension. I did not realize spouses were joining negotiations now. Julian calmly opened the briefing folder Adrian had given him in the car. Neither did I. Adrian almost smiled. Across the table sat Victor Lang, president of Lang Development, a confident Alpha who had spent the first 20 minutes insisting his company had another buyer ready to pay $12 million more for the Westbridge property. Adrian's advisors were growing impatient. Julian remained silent. He studied Victor instead. Every time Adrian mentioned price, Victor looked toward his attorney. Every time Adrian mentioned timing, Victor looked toward his chief financial officer. But when Adrian mentioned environmental review, both men suddenly stopped moving. Julian leaned slightly toward Adrian. Ask when their alternative buyer plans to close. Adrian did not question him. When does your other buyer close? Victor paused. Within 30 days. Interesting, Julian said. Every face turned toward him. Victor frowned. Excuse me? Julian closed the folder. A 30-day closing would require the environmental clearance to already be complete. According to the county filing published yesterday, the eastern section still requires supplemental review. Victor's attorney shifted in his chair. Julian continued evenly. So either your other buyer intends to purchase a property without completed clearance, or there is no other buyer. Silence settled over the room. One of Adrian's advisors looked down to hide his reaction. Victor gave a dismissive laugh. You seem unusually interested in business for an Omega husband. Adrian's expression cooled, but Julian touched the edge of his folder, silently asking him not to intervene. You are right, Julian said. I am interested in business, especially expensive business built around imaginary deadlines. Victor's smile disappeared. Julian turned one page. Cross Strategic Group does not need Westbridge this month. Your company does. Your refinancing deadline is in 17 days. This time Victor looked directly at his chief financial officer. That single glance answered everything. Adrian leaned back, suddenly understanding Julian's strategy. Then perhaps, Adrian said, we should discuss the actual value of the property. 40 minutes later, the meeting ended with terms significantly better than Adrian's team had expected. In the hallway, his senior advisor Daniel Mercer caught up with them. He looked at Julian differently now. Where did you learn to negotiate like that? I learned to listen when people thought I had nothing worth saying. Daniel nodded slowly. Adrian said nothing until they entered the elevator. As the doors closed, he looked at Julian. You could have embarrassed Victor. That would have made him defensive. Instead, you gave him a way to accept reality without losing face. Julian glanced at him. Winning is useful. Leaving someone enough dignity to work with you tomorrow is smarter. Adrian stared at his husband as the elevator descended. His world had always measured power by who commanded the room. Julian had just controlled one without commanding anyone. When they returned to Cross Estate that afternoon, 2 senior members stood near the entrance. Yesterday, neither had acknowledged Julian. Today, both stepped aside. "Good afternoon, Mr. Hayes," one said respectfully. Julian continued inside, but Adrian noticed something else. Daniel watched Julian pass and quietly corrected him. "Mr. Cross. He is the boss's Omega husband." This time, nobody laughed. That evening, Julian found Adrian alone in the estate kitchen, standing beside the counter, with his suit jacket folded over a chair and 2 untouched cups of coffee nearby. It was the first time Julian had seen him anywhere that did not look designed for negotiations. "Daniel told me what happened downstairs," Julian said. Adrian glanced toward him. "He should not have corrected them." "Why?" "Because respect ordered by the boss is not respect." Julian considered that answer. "Then you understand more about people than you pretend." Adrian handed him one of the coffees. "Do not make conclusions from one sentence." Julian accepted it anyway. On the refrigerator door, among schedules and household notes, he noticed a photograph of Adrian standing beside an older woman and 3 children at a community center. Adrian followed his gaze. "Who are they?" Julian asked. "The family of an employee who died 6 years ago." "You still visit them?" "His oldest daughter starts college next month." Julian looked closer. "You are paying her tuition." Adrian became quiet. "How did you know?" "The Cross Foundation scholarship list. Her last name appeared there." Adrian gave him a long look. "Do you investigate everyone you marry?" "I have only married one person." The answer almost broke Adrian's composure. Almost. Julian set his coffee down. "Why keep it secret?" Adrian looked toward the dark window. "Because responsibility becomes meaningless when it is performed for applause." For several seconds, neither spoke. The man standing before Julian felt different from the figure everyone feared disappointing. "People think you rule through fear," Julian said. "Fear is efficient, but you do not believe it is enough." Adrian's eyes shifted back to him. "Fear can keep an organization standing. Responsibility gives it a reason to stand." Julian felt something inside his understanding of Adrian quietly rearrange itself. The coldness was real, but perhaps it was armor rather than emptiness. Adrian picked up his coffee. "My father believed affection belonged nowhere near leadership. He said loving people gave them power over your judgment." "Did you believe him?" "For a long time." "And now?" Adrian hesitated. "Now I think he confused love with surrendering judgment." Julian nodded. "Those are not the same thing." Adrian studied him with an intensity that no longer felt dismissive. Before he could answer, Daniel entered carrying a sealed folder. "Sorry to interrupt. We finished reviewing Marcus's communications." Adrian immediately returned to business. "And?" "Nothing. Whatever is happening, he covered his tracks." Daniel placed the folder down. "But we found something else. 3 unauthorized payments were routed through an old Cross account." Julian opened the folder and froze when he saw the account number. He had seen it before, buried inside the marriage agreement near Clause 47. "Adrian," he said quietly, "this account is connected to the transfer pathway." Adrian moved beside him. Julian turned the page and noticed an unfamiliar designation beside the original authorization records. "What is the second voice?" Daniel's face changed. Adrian looked at him. "You know that term?" Daniel did not answer immediately. Then he glanced toward the hallway leading to the private council room. "There is something both of you need to see." Minutes later, Daniel opened the council room doors. Julian counted 12 chairs around the long table. 11 matched perfectly. The 12th was older, darker, and positioned directly beside Adrian's. No one had ever sat there. Julian stepped closer. A small silver emblem was carved into its back. Beneath it were two faded words. Omega Consigliere. Julian stared at the carved words, while Daniel closed the council room doors behind them. Omega Consigliere was not a ceremonial title, Daniel said. A century ago, every cross leader had a second voice. Someone permitted to question the head of the family when everyone else was too afraid or too loyal to disagree. Adrian ran his fingers across the back of the empty chair. Why have I never heard this? Daniel hesitated. Because the position disappeared 3 generations ago. Your great-grandfather removed it from the charter. Julian looked toward the 11 matching chairs. And everyone after him simply accepted that? Eventually, people forgot there had ever been another way. Daniel opened an old cabinet and removed a narrow leather ledger. Inside were handwritten records, meeting notes, and signatures dating back decades. Julian quickly recognized a pattern. Beside every cross leader's name appeared another signature, often belonging to an Omega spouse or advisor. They reviewed major agreements, challenged succession decisions, and could demand a second vote when evidence had been ignored. Adrian's expression grew darker with every page. My family did not build this organization around one man's judgment, he said. No, Julian replied. They built it around the possibility that one man could be wrong. Daniel turned to a marked section near the back. The language was old, but the meaning was unmistakable. The authority of the second voice could be restored through marriage if a cross leader entered a legally recognized union and granted the spouse access to strategic holdings. Julian suddenly remembered Clause 47. The marriage contract had done exactly that. Someone did not hide only a transfer pathway, Julian said. They accidentally reopened this position. Daniel shook his head. I do not think it was accidental. Adrian looked at him sharply. Daniel pointed to the unauthorized payments. Each had been approved through accounts historically controlled by the second voice. Someone had been using a forgotten structure because nobody alive was expected to understand it. Until Julian did. The next morning, Adrian called the senior council together. Julian entered last. Conversation faded as every Alpha noticed where Adrian was standing. Beside the old chair. Marcus Reed looked particularly unsettled. There appears to be confusion about my husband's place in this organization, Adrian said. So I am correcting it. He pulled the chair away from the table. Julian did not move. Do not offer it because I found a loophole, he said quietly. Several council members stared at him. Adrian's eyes narrowed. Then why should I offer it? Julian met his gaze. Because you believe the person sitting there should be allowed to tell you when you are wrong. The room became completely still. Adrian could have treated the question as disrespect. Instead, he considered it. Would you? Whenever necessary. A faint smile appeared at the corner of Adrian's mouth. Then I probably need you there. Julian sat. Nobody objected. Marcus avoided looking at him. During the next hour, Julian listened as the council discussed the unexplained payments. He asked only 4 questions. The 4th changed everything. Who benefits if Adrian believes Marcus is the traitor? Marcus finally looked up. Adrian's attention shifted from the evidence to the people presenting it. Julian saw understanding move across his face. The clues against Marcus were almost too convenient. Someone had not merely leaked information. Someone was choosing where Adrian would look. Julian rested one hand on the old table. The forgotten chair had returned, and with it came the purpose the Cross family had buried for generations. The second voice was not there to agree with power. It existed to see what power could not. The question changed the room. Adrian looked from Marcus to the documents spread across the table and realized Julian was right. Every clue pointed toward Marcus with almost theatrical precision.
"We stop assuming,"
Adrian said.
"From this moment forward, every conclusion requires independent evidence."
Julian caught the surprise on several faces. Adrian Cross had just allowed doubt into a room where his decisions were usually final. Over the next 3 days, Julian and Adrian reviewed the information together. They discovered that Marcus had leaked the Westbridge detail, but not intentionally. He had mentioned the altered schedule during a private call with someone he trusted, believing the information harmless. That person had passed it along. Marcus had been careless, but he was not the architect behind Clause 47. The distinction mattered to Julian, and increasingly, it mattered to Adrian. Then, on Thursday morning, everything turned against Julian. Daniel arrived at the library carrying a folder, and an expression Julian had never seen before.
"We have a problem."
Inside were copies of confidential Cross documents, and records showing they had been sent from an account registered in Julian's name. There were also payment records suggesting money had moved through a Hayes family company shortly after the wedding. Adrian read every page without speaking. Julian felt the old instincts of the room return around him. Suspicion. Certainty. Judgment.
"I did not send these,"
Julian said. Daniel looked troubled.
"The records say otherwise. Records can be manufactured. These came from 3 separate systems."
Adrian finally raised his eyes. For one terrible second, Julian wondered whether all the respect they had built would disappear beneath the weight of convenient evidence.
"Leave us,"
Adrian told Daniel. When the door closed, Julian stood straighter.
"If you believe I betrayed you, say it."
Adrian placed the papers down.
"I believe the evidence wants me to believe you betrayed me."
Julian's anger paused. Adrian continued,
"That is not the same thing. You are taking a risk." "No. I am refusing to confuse certainty with intelligence."
Julian recognized his own lesson reflected back at him. Adrian walked to the window.
"Someone created a trail toward Marcus. We questioned it. Now the trail points toward you, the one person who taught me to question it."
He turned.
"That makes you the least convenient suspect and the most convenient target."
For the first time since the wedding, Julian felt something stronger than admiration for Adrian. Trust had become reciprocal. They spent the afternoon examining the false trail. Julian noticed that every suspicious transaction had been timestamped during moments when he was publicly beside Adrian. Whoever created the records wanted an alibi to look like deliberate cover. Adrian noticed something else. The account used Julian's legal name, Julian Hayes, even though the marriage agreement had changed his financial designation to Julian Hayes Cross immediately after the ceremony.
"Whoever built this trail used information prepared before our marriage became official,"
Adrian said. Julian looked toward the original contract on the desk.
"Then they planned for me before I ever entered this house."
Adrian opened the document to Clause 47. At the bottom of the page was an authorization code neither of them had examined closely. Julian compared it with the old second voice ledger and felt his pulse quicken. The code belonged to someone with access to archive cross-governance records. Only a handful of people could have known those records existed. Adrian reached for the internal directory. Julian stopped him.
"Do not alert them."
Adrian looked at his Omega husband.
"What do you suggest?"
Julian's voice was calm.
"We give them something they cannot resist stealing, and this time, we watch who reaches for it."
The trap Julian designed was almost disappointingly simple. Adrian authorized a confidential proposal suggesting that Cross Strategic Group planned to restore the second voice permanently and transfer oversight of 3 legacy accounts to Julian. Only 5 people received copies, and each version contained one harmless difference. One listed the transfer for Monday, another Tuesday, another Wednesday. Julian insisted they wait. By Friday afternoon, an outside attorney contacted Cross headquarters asking whether the Wednesday transfer would affect an old subsidiary agreement. Adrian read the message twice. Only one copy had mentioned Wednesday. It belonged to Charles Widmore, the Cross family's senior records counsel, a man who had advised Adrian's father and controlled access to the archived governance files for nearly 30 years. When confronted with the discrepancy, Charles did not deny sharing information. He claimed he had been protecting the organization from an outdated system that gave too much authority to a spouse. His explanation revealed the deeper truth. Years earlier, Charles had discovered the forgotten second voice provisions and quietly used dormant accounts to influence internal decisions. Julian's marriage threatened to activate legitimate oversight and expose everything. Marcus had been useful as a distraction. Julian had become dangerous because he noticed patterns Charles expected everyone else to ignore. Adrian removed Charles from every position of authority and ordered an independent review of the legacy accounts. There was no spectacle, no revenge, only consequences supported by evidence. By sunset, the crisis that had begun with Clause 47 was finally contained. Everyone expected Julian to celebrate. Instead, he returned to the private study where the marriage had begun and placed his wedding ring beside the original contract. Adrian entered minutes later and stopped when he saw it.
"What is this?" "The reason I stayed is finished."
Adrian's face became unreadable.
"You think that is all you were doing here?" "No."
Julian looked at him steadily.
"That is exactly why leaving is difficult."
Adrian stepped closer, but stopped several feet away.
"Then do not leave."
Julian almost smiled, but sadness reached his eyes first.
"Why?"
Adrian opened his mouth, then said nothing. Julian waited. He needed one answer that had nothing to do with strategy, responsibility, or the Cross name. Adrian finally said,
"Because I need you."
Julian lowered his gaze.
"That is what I was afraid you would say."
Confusion crossed Adrian's face.
"You saved this organization. You changed how I lead. You see things nobody else sees. Those are reasons to hire me."
Julian pushed the contract toward him.
"They are not reasons to love me."
Adrian became completely still. Julian's voice softened.
"I will not spend my life wondering whether you want Julian or whether Adrian Cross simply discovered that having an Omega advisor makes his empire stronger. You know it is more than that. I believe it might be. But you have spent your entire life measuring people by usefulness. I cannot teach you the difference by remaining useful forever."
Adrian looked at the ring. For once, power offered him no answer. The agreement still gave him legal options that could delay Julian's departure. Julian knew it. Adrian knew it.
"If I asked you to stay,"
Adrian said,
"would you? As your obligation?"
"No."
"As my second voice?" "No."
Adrian's voice grew quieter.
"As my husband?"
Julian's expression nearly broke.
"Not until you know why you are asking."
He walked toward the door, then stopped.
"You once told me responsibility gives power a reason to stand. I think love asks something harder."
Adrian looked at him.
"What?"
Julian opened the door.
"It asks whether you can let someone choose you when you have the power to take away their choice."
Then Julian left Cross Estate carrying one suitcase. While Adrian remained beside the contract, staring at the ring, he suddenly understood he had never truly earned. For the first time in years, Adrian Cross discovered that silence could be louder than a crowded council room. Julian had been gone for 11 days, yet traces of him remained everywhere. His untouched coffee cup was still in the library cabinet. His notes remained beside the old governance ledger. The chair of the second voice stood empty again, but now its emptiness felt like an accusation. Adrian could have called Julian. He could have sent a car, invoked the marriage agreement, or asked someone Julian trusted to persuade him to return. He did none of those things. Instead, Adrian read the contract from beginning to end, and finally saw what Julian had understood before he did. Almost every protection Adrian had offered came with control attached. Security, housing, financial access, public status, even Julian's position inside the organization existed because Adrian had granted them. It was generosity built on permission, and permission could always be withdrawn. The next morning, Adrian summoned the council.
"The marriage agreement is being dissolved,"
he announced. Several members exchanged surprised looks. Daniel remained silent. Adrian placed a new set of documents on the table.
"Julian Hayes Cross will retain every financial protection promised to him, whether he returns here or not. His family obligations are settled permanently. His access to independent assets cannot be revoked by me or any future Cross leader."
One council member frowned.
"And the second voice?"
Adrian looked toward the empty chair.
"It stays. Without Julian? Especially without Julian."
That answer changed the room. Adrian restored the office formally, creating an independent advisory position with authority to challenge major decisions and demand outside review. Eligibility would no longer depend on being an Alpha, an Omega, a spouse, or a member of the Cross family. The strongest argument would matter more than the strongest title. Daniel studied him afterward.
"You realize Julian may never know you did this. He does not need to know. Then why do it?"
Adrian looked at the old chair.
"Because he was right."
Across the city, Julian was rebuilding a quieter life in a small apartment above a bookstore. He had expected freedom to feel triumphant. Instead, it felt honest. He missed Adrian, but he refused to confuse missing someone with needing to return to them. Then Marcus called. Julian nearly ignored the number.
"I thought you should know,"
Marcus said.
"Adrian changed the charter."
Julian listened without interrupting as Marcus explained everything. No conditions. No request for Julian's return. No hidden clause. When the call ended, Julian sat beside the window for a long time. Adrian had changed the system even when there was nothing left to gain from Julian. That mattered more than any confession could have. 3 weeks later, Cross Strategic Group held its first council meeting under the restored charter. Adrian entered and automatically looked toward the second voice chair. Empty. He had trained himself not to expect otherwise. Halfway through the meeting, the doors opened. Conversation stopped. Julian stood there in a dark suit, composed and confident, holding the revised charter in one hand. Adrian rose slowly.
"Julian, I read the changes."
Adrian did not approach him.
"They were necessary. Even if I never came back, they were never supposed to be payment for your return."
Julian's eyes softened. Adrian gestured toward the empty chair, then stopped himself. He would not tell Julian where to sit. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Julian crossed the room on his own. He pulled out the second voice chair and sat beside Adrian.
"You have a meeting to finish,"
Julian said. Adrian looked at him, understanding what the choice meant and what it did not mean. Julian had returned to the table. Whether he would return as Adrian's husband was still his decision alone. The meeting lasted another hour, but Adrian barely remembered the numbers discussed after Julian returned to the second voice chair. He forced himself to remain focused, and Julian challenged two proposals with the same calm precision that had once irritated half the council and impressed the other half. When the meeting ended, everyone left. Without comment, although Daniel paused at the doorway and gave Julian a quiet nod. Soon only Adrian and Julian remained. Neither spoke until Julian looked at the old chair beneath him.
"It feels different now."
Adrian closed the final folder.
"Because it belongs to you? Because it does not."
Julian looked around the room.
"That is why restoring it mattered. The position should belong to whoever is willing to question power responsibly."
Adrian nodded.
You taught me that. No. Your family knew it long before either of us existed. I only found what they forgot.
Adrian stood.
You found more than that.
Julian followed him into the private study where their marriage had begun. The original contract was gone. In its place rested a single white sheet of paper and Julian's wedding ring. Julian stopped.
What is this?
Adrian turned the paper toward him. There were no legal clauses, no signatures, and no conditions. Only one sentence appeared in the center. No terms. No debt. No obligation. Choose me only if you want me. Julian read it twice.
That is not much of a contract. It is not a contract.
Adrian's voice was quieter than Julian had ever heard it.
I spent most of my life believing that anything important had to be secured. Businesses, alliances, loyalty, even people. Then you walked into this house and showed me that something freely chosen is stronger than something controlled.
Julian looked at the ring, but did not reach for it. Adrian continued.
When you left, I thought I had lost the person who made my organization better. That was true, but it was not why the house felt empty.
He paused, searching for words that power had never required him to learn.
I missed your questions at breakfast. I missed finding your cold coffee in the library because you forgot to drink it. I missed the way you looked at me when you knew I was wrong and were deciding how politely to say it. I missed you when there was nothing you could do for me.
Julian's eyes softened.
Adrian, I love you, Julian. Not because you saved Cross Strategic Group. Not because you became the second voice. Not because I need your judgment. I love the man who could walk away from everything.
I offered because he respected himself enough to demand something real.
Adrian stepped back from the table, deliberately leaving the ring between them.
You owe me nothing. If you leave tonight, nothing changes. Your freedom remains yours.
Julian stared at him for a long moment. Then he picked up the paper.
There is one problem.
Adrian's expression tightened.
What? You finally wrote an agreement I cannot improve.
Adrian laughed, a genuine sound Julian had rarely heard. Julian reached for the ring and slowly placed it back on his finger.
I am not returning because you need an Omega husband.
He stepped closer.
I am returning because I choose my husband.
Months later, the Cross Council no longer fell silent when Julian entered because they underestimated him. They fell silent because they wanted to hear what he had noticed. Adrian remained powerful, disciplined, and commanding, but his greatest strength was no longer measured by how completely he controlled the world around him. It was measured by the space he could make for another man to stand beside him. Their first marriage had created an alliance. Their second began without another ceremony, without another contract, and without a single obligation. It began with a choice. And every morning afterward, they chose each other again.